Well, hello and welcome to Family and Community Focus. This is a program sponsored by the Collaborative Research Institute, the Institute for Community Health Promotion. I'm Kevin Miller, and in today's episode we're going to talk about stress. Everyone feels stressed from time to time. And one of the things I've always found interesting is that what stresses out one person doesn't necessarily stress out another person. And this begs some curious questions as to what is stress? How does your mind, body, and health interact with stress? Why does stress affect people differently? And what can be done about it? And fortunately, joining me to provide some answers and insight on the topic of the mind-body interactions with stress and intertreatment is Dr. Stephen Dubovsky, Professor and Chair of the Department of Psychiatry here at the University of Buffalo. Welcome, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So maybe we can just begin with the first question of, can we define stress? What is stress?
Well, in the first place, stress is normal. Without stress, life would be boring, and there wouldn't be anything happening. So life is filled with stress. The question is, at what point does stress become overwhelming, and at what point are you not able to adapt to it? A reasonable amount of stress motivates us to do our daily activities, to deal with challenges. You take an exam in class, that's stressful. You're going to be a little bit nervous about the exam. Maybe you'll prepare better. If you're a little bit nervous, you'll be more careful in taking the exam and you'll do well. You're overwhelmingly anxious about taking an exam. It feels overwhelmingly stressful because you failed the last 4 exams. Then that stress response may interfere with your ability to study. You can't concentrate. You rush through the exam and don't do as well. So the question is, at what level does stress make us feel overwhelmed? And at what point do we stop coping adaptively with stress and start coping maladaptively?
Maladaptively meaning when it interferes with...
Right, it interferes with our functioning and our ability to master common challenges. For example, a big issue these days in universities is diversity of opinion. So you have people who say, your opinion is so stressful to me that I can't tolerate it. I'm overwhelmed by having to hear something that I don't agree with. Therefore, you should stop stressing me by either shut up or go away or agree with me or I'm stressed out. Now that would be an example of a normal and actually useful amount of stress. How do you grow intellectually? How do you ever shape a real opinion except through exchange of ideas? If everyone always agreed with you, you never learn anything. And if you already knew everything, well, you wouldn't be in school in the first place. So this is how we learn and how we grow and become better citizens and better adapted to the world. When a person says, it is so stressful to me to hear your opinion because the challenge to me is I then have to integrate what you say with my own opinion, which is divergent from that, and that's too difficult for me. I can't do it. That would be an example of a maladaptive response to a normal amount of stress. Not only does it interfere with the reasonable exchange of ideas in a university, which is, after all, a knowledge factory. The purpose of a university is to exchange ideas and develop new thinking and expand that thinking. Well, you're not going to achieve that goal if nobody listens to anyone else. So this is maladaptive to the smaller society, it's maladaptive to society in general, and it's maladaptive to me. If I can't hear anything I don't agree with or I shut down, how am I ever going to learn anything?
You know, one place I find that interesting, that concept, is having worked in facilities with individuals in need. is working with children, and sometimes, whether you're a foster parent or if you're a parent, or you are a child care worker who's employed by an agency, your expectations of what you're thinking about should be happening, and the child or the other adults you're working with don't do that expectation. That can cause some anxiety and possibly, I think, the stress you're talking about.
Well, this is a very good example of the dependency on the situation of what's actually stressful. So all of us find it challenging to deal with a situation where our expectations are not met. That's always anxiety provoking because we develop an idea of what things are supposed to be like. We go in there, we feel prepared, all of a sudden it's different. Now we feel at sea. Now, when you're in the position of you have to help someone else who functions at a different level from you, your expectation is, oh, they're going to be like me, so they'll listen to reason. I say, no, you really can't bang your head on the wall. Bang. You're not supposed to do that. Bang.
Right.
Well, let me explain to you why that is, and then you'll see and you'll agree with me. Well, that particular child may not be capable, at least at that moment, of understanding that, so you have to stop him. But if you view that as outside of your expectation of your role, that's going to be very stressful for you. The question is, how do you handle that stress? If you handle it by saying, I give up, and you run away, you're no help. If you handle the stress by smacking your charge because you don't know what else to do, that's not going to help either. So you have to adjust to the situation. And that's really what life is like most of the time. It hardly ever meets our
I
expectations.
think anybody who's a parent or who's been around has probably exhibited that, and we all could probably think back saying, well, I never caused my parents stress.
Sure,
Well,
right,
that's probably not an accurate statement.
You know that line from the Fantastics, why can't they be like we were, perfect in every way? So we were all perfect as kids. But nowadays, in my day, it was never like this.
Right.
It was like this in everyone's day, because it's a change of perspective for people, and that's stressful.
And as you're saying, as new information, new knowledge develops,
Right.
in some cases our technology and various aspects of
Right.
things that can contribute to that.
I'm driving down the street, I see the light's green for me. My expectation is nobody's going to run the red light on the other side and run into me. So I just drive down the street and I don't look. And one day someone runs a light and smashes into me. That's not particularly adaptive. Instead, if I have any sense, I know that not everybody pays attention to the light, so I'll look.
Right.
I don't necessarily stop in the middle of the intersection, but I'll look. If I see somebody zooming, maybe I'll slow down, and I'm less likely to get hit. So in everyday life, we form expectations based on our own prejudgments and our own past experience, and a lot of times those expectations are not met. It's stressful. The question is, how do we adapt to it?
I think the other thing is, this thing's coming to my mind, is that if you're the person in power, or if you're a person that's caretaker or whatever, the ability to set expectations can help reduce stress, because at least you can get them out there versus somebody just behaves a certain way because they expected to behave that way. You didn't match up with your
right.
expectations, and
That's very
you were
true.
in conflict.
Yeah, that's very true.
So how does the mind and body react to and perhaps play a role in influencing stress?
Well, our response to stress is a response to danger. What stress is the perception of something, as I said, that doesn't meet our expectations, and that produces the possibility of danger. Because if I know everything that's going to happen, I'm in no danger. I can predict every conceivable contingency. So whenever things don't match, that's stress. Stress turns on a system in our body called fight-flight. And what this does is prepare us to interact with something that's dangerous or to run away from it. We have another type of stress response called conservation withdrawal, and what that involves is simply slowing everything down and waiting till things get better. An example of this would be hibernation. So a bear in the winter can't find food. You can either migrate 2,000 miles or go to sleep for a few months until it stops snowing and it warms up. And these are the three ways we have of dealing with stress. These are programmed into our nervous systems. The fight-flight part, what this does is there is a part of the deep part of our brain called the locus ceruleus, and what this part of the brain does is recognizes danger and responds to it. It turns on that fight-flight response if it makes a judgment that this involves some element of danger. And if you just think about yourself driving down the road on an icy road, you skid a little bit, your heart kind of beats fast, you feel kind of shaky, your mouth feels a little dry. These are physical responses to the perception of danger. When you either interact with the danger and overcome it, or you escape from it, or you define it as no longer dangerous, normally that stress, that response, that fight-flight response will turn itself off and the physiology of your body will return to normal. If the stress is very prolonged, or if you're not able to master it in one of these ways I just described, then the stress response continues. And what's happening in that stress response? Your body is, first of all, preparing for danger. So blood flow changes. You're sending more blood flow to muscles, to organs of action, and blood flow is directed to some extent away from non-essential organs like your skin, which is why your skin will feel clammy or cold at times, while your heart is beating fast. Your adrenal glands, which are connected to the stress response, are putting out two types of stress hormones. One type of stress hormone is called epinephrine, and its cousin norepinephrine. These are hormones that circulate through the body to prepare you metabolically for challenge. Another adrenal hormone is called cortisol. The purpose of this hormone is to suppress immunity. And the reason for that, from an evolutionary standpoint, is if you're facing physical danger, which is how all this evolved, before we evolved the capacity to think and think symbolically about, have symbolic dangers, all our dangers were real physical dangers. If you're in physical danger, you may be injured. If you're injured, you don't want your immune system to attack damaged tissue, thinking that now it's been changed and you have to eliminate it, so you don't want to attack your own body. So your immune response will turn itself down. And normally that all resets itself and you're fine. If your body happens to be vulnerable to the physical dimensions of the stress response, you may overwhelm it. So for example, if your heart is prone to abnormal rhythms, or your blood pressure tends to fluctuate or be high in the first place, as you get this stress response, it may overwhelm your cardiovascular system. You may develop severe hypertension. You may develop a cardiac problem. If your immune system is sensitive, you may shut off immunity, and that may have severe consequences too. Now, with long-term stress, we then end up turning on other types of systems through hormonal interactions that promote immunity and that promote an immune response on the grounds that you're going to be encountering foreign substances that you want to be able to suppress. That immunity then attacks your own body, and then you have your own immune system causing a variety of problems, ranging from different inflammatory diseases. Lupus, for example, would be one example of an inflammatory disease, can be aggravated, sometimes brought out, usually is aggravated by this ongoing stress response.
The one that, what begs the question again is going to be, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, is, how do you recognize it in yourself and why do you do something? But the hibernation one is the one that you mentioned a little bit. I want to touch on maybe just a little more. That to me reminds me of somebody who might retreat to their room.
Yes.
More like a melancholic kind of thing, almost like a depression, symptomatic kind of way of responding.
From a physiological standpoint, conservation withdrawal, hibernation, has something in common with depression. But if you look at the physiology of conservation withdrawal, what's happening is you're turning everything down. So you've made the judgment, may or may not be conscious, your body has made the judgment, I can't get away from this, I can't overcome it, I'm just simply going to ride it out. Your nervous system turns itself down, your heart rate slows, your body temperature slows. Instead of your metabolism speeding up in fight-flight, you're putting out more glucose to fuel, they provide an energy supply for action organs. Here you're turning down your metabolism. Now if you look at a depressed person who looks just like that, very withdrawn, won't get out of bed, seems like can't think clearly, very slowed down. If you look at them physiologically, they are in an extreme state of fight-flight. Their heart rate is increased, not slowed down. Their metabolism is speeded up, not slowed down. And what's happened here is they're overwhelmed by fight-flight and they just kind of shut down. Kind of like the hibernation example would be you're waiting for the gas station to open. You just park and shut your car off and it stays there till the gas station opens. In depression, what's happening is your car's revving so much it starts burning up. Your wheels are spinning. You're over-revving in a low gear and not getting anywhere. So physiologically, that's the difference between depression, which is maladaptive, and conservation withdrawal, which is generally adaptive.
And when you're working, I guess the idea of working with kids or even adults, and they need that little, called timeout sometimes.
Right.
They need a little time away to be able to recoup,
Exactly.
and all that kind. It's a good thing.
There are people who get very overwhelmed in particular situations, and a lot of times we feel obligated to resolve it right there.
Right.
And as you point out, a lot of people just say, why don't you take a break? This works with your kids. Go to your room, take a break for a few minutes. Not you're grounded for the rest of your life.
Right.
Take a few minutes, slow down, calm down a little bit. And the same for me. And let's come back to it when we're both calmer, because we're so activated at this point. We're both so stressed, we're no longer interacting adaptively.
Right. So you kind of hit on a lot of these questions I had in here about the body influence on the mental states and all that. Maybe the other way is the mind affecting the body. And that's the perception part I think you were talking about, and how that plays out.
Well, the organ of the mind is the brain. So God gave us thought, and he gave us an organ of thought. That's a brain. If you didn't have a brain, you wouldn't be able to think. You wouldn't be able to assess your environment. You wouldn't be able to know how to respond and adapt to life. So everything that happens in our environment is translated through our brain. It's not coming through the air or anything. It's not coming through prana, energy particles in the air. It's impacting our nervous system. Our nervous system then sends signals to various parts of our body as to how to respond. Because we have the capacity to remember things, to think symbolically, we can interpret a lot of things as dangers that might or might not really be dangerous, or there might be a real danger that we don't shut off necessarily. In that case, our brain is saying turn on these systems of fight-flight or turn them off for conservation withdrawal, and that's having multiple effects on different organ systems in our body. So in fact, our mind has quite a bit of control over our body, both good and bad. We're more aware of the bad parts. The good parts are harder to achieve because they involve resolving that stress response. To use the example I said before, if your idea of dealing with stress is make the world stop being stressful, however you've defined that, you're going to have a mighty tough time shutting off that physiology of fight-flight. If you're able to say, okay, that's stressful, but I can't overcome it necessarily, but there are some things I could do to make it a little bit better, to feel like I have some sense of control. There are some ways I can learn to reduce that level of arousal and fight-flight that I've got. Then you're mitigating the effect of stress on your body.
We've got a couple minutes left in that kind of, but maybe we can talk about what those are, what those things people can do to do this, because I know that we all look at it I always look at it as lenses. A person who wears glasses, without them, I don't see some stressful things. I'm not going to, because they're not in my perception. I can't grasp them. But what can I do other than I wear glasses for my vision? What can we do for our vision of stress?
Well, some stress is good to recognize. Like if a guy's running a red light, it's good to be wary of it. Some stress, you're better off redefining. Put on a different pair of glasses. You may have astigmatism, and you may need a different prescription. And to use the example I mentioned earlier of an everyday thing, if you think that someone who disagrees with you that that's stressful, you've got a problem unless you want to live in a padded cell or, buy yourself an island somewhere. So you're going to have to deal with that. So the first step is redefine what's stressful. And is this really a danger to me or not? To the extent it is a danger, how do I deal with it and in a way that I have some sense of mastery or control over it? Because it's that feeling that you're a passive, helpless victim that turns on that stress response. To the extent you have a sense of mastery and control, it will turn it down. The mastery and control is usually not achieved by beating up the person who disagrees with you, because that's going to cause other problems, and it won't help you define the world as something you can really interact with, because you can't beat up everybody. So what you have to look at is, okay, I don't agree with this. I can deal with this. Here's something I can't do anything about. I'm going to let that go because it's not going to hurt me. Here's something I can do something about, and I'm going to address that. Then there are things we can do to settle our bodies down, and those involve learning relaxation techniques. There are very structured techniques that are quite useful for this. One of the newer techniques that's very helpful in taking your mind off of things that feel overwhelming, and particularly that orient your thinking toward internally generated stress. In other words, I see this as overwhelmingly stressful. Nobody else does, but I do. What I've got to do is either redefine this as it's not stressful, or take my mind away from this internally generated idea and onto something that makes me feel calmer and more in control. This technique is technically called mentalization. It involves an element of meditation. From a physiological standpoint, you are turning your attention away from internally generated negative states associated with negative thinking and onto something where you feel more in control. And that can be very useful. If you practice this kind of thing a lot, then you're like some of the yogis who can change the temperature of one finger by 10 degrees, for example. There is a wonderful treatment, speaking of this, for migraine headaches, which are the change in blood flow in the outside of your head. And if you learn to raise the temperature of one finger, it redirects blood flow, and it's a great treatment for migraine headaches, also for hypertension. There are mechanical ways of doing this with things called biofeedback that will also teach you to relax your muscles, gain a sense of relaxation. There are visualization techniques that are also very useful. And the more you practice these, the more you are defining yourself as someone who is interacting constructively with a stressful situation by redefining it or muting your response to it. You're protecting your body, you're protecting your mind, and you're giving yourself a greater ability to control a stressful world.
I'm going to have us close on that, but there's a lot more I'd like to talk to you about, because I actually have some background in the biofeedback stuff and when we were doing with teachers. And the idea was we were going to have parents have to go through a little biofeedback thing before they went into the principal's office, or the kids to do that, to do some kind of technique so that while they were angry coming in, we want to get them to a point where we can have a productive conversation. We were going to do that with children, and I actually have done some work with high school kids in areas, and it's very fascinating. But you mentioned a lot of possibilities. I think we highly encourage people to look for those possibilities and try to find those. I hope you enjoyed today. It was a very, I think, informative, very quick segment. Dr. Steve Dubovsky, a professor and chair of the Department of Psychiatry. Thank you.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.